Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life Was Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is founder and creator of Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He offers and leads public and private tours as well as presentations of historical sites throughout communities in the state of Massachusetts. The communities he has been focused on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and Easthampton, as well as Granby and Amherst. His tours spotlight the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as selected streets, parks, and historical houses throughout the communities. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the Reservoirs of Easthampton, located in Easthampton, Massachusetts. So what are the 5 reservoirs of Easthampton?
The 5 reservoirs of Easthampton are Upper Mill Pond, which is a reservoir, not a pond, and Lower Mill Pond, which is a reservoir, Neshowannock Pond, which is a reservoir, and Wilton Brook Pond, and Rubber Thread Pond. All right, why are there so many? And even there's an Easthampton Waterworks Dam. And so that's 6. So, are there any natural lakes around? Well, we're going to answer that question along the way today. And when were these dams built to make these 6 reservoirs? We're going to answer that. So we're going to talk about the history of it. What has been done to all of these reservoirs nowadays? Remember the heyday, the big time of these power systems was probably in the late 1800s. And so we're now at least 120 years past that. What has been done to these locations?
And why were they built?
They were built as power reservoirs, power dams, sometimes with spillways, and I don't think there are any power canals with them, but there has to be included some kind of tunnel to get the water from the reservoir down to the mill complex. Usually there's only one mill associated with each one of these. So the Upper Mill Pond was built by Mr. Williston, Samuel Williston, in order to make a button factory and a thread factory. And then he also made Lower Mill Pond to make a thread factory and a fiber factory. Right? And even when they sold off, there was still a cotton factory and thread factory. All right. Now the Neshowannock is one of those mills backed up. Now there's also the Wilton Brook Pond, and that one plus the Rubber Thread Pond are mostly for thread companies. And then there's the Easthampton Waterworks Dam that backs up a little bit on the Manhattan River, and that one's still there, and they're all basically still there, but they don't function in the same way at all. So they were made for one big job a long time ago, and that's to get power out of them. And there was no electricity, so they were getting hydromechanical power distributed from them. And this was great because you could have a mill that got lots of power to run lots of machinery because it had belts and wheels connected to this, and you'd have a full complex. And this full complex would include worker homes and little villages, and they all developed their little tiny villages around them. Because remember, people couldn't drive to work, they had to walk to work. So quite a difference.
Really quick, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along his tour, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours or other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, and his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, does Easthampton have any natural fresh ponds or lakes?
It has none. So everything you see around Easthampton that looks like a body of water you should be able to call a pond or lake is not such at all. They're all reservoirs. So it has about 6 reservoirs, maybe 5, depending on how you count them up. And that's it. There's not even a tiny pond. No lakes for sure. It has lots of brooks, creeks, and rivers, including the Manhan and the Connecticut. And the Broad Brook is really a creek. And then lots of little ones coming in including White Brook and Wilton. So, all these bodies of water that you see are not at all natural. When you drive anywhere in Massachusetts and you see bodied water, it's most like a reservoir because reservoirs were put close to people and now thus are close to roads they drive on. And actually to find a pond or lake anywhere is very, very rare. And you have to have a ground surrounded in 4 directions by higher ground. And so you need low ground in a bowl to get even a pond. And then a big one, you get a lake. And that's very hard to find because usually you'll have 1 or 2 of the sides near a brook with lower ground and the water cannot build up. So lakes are quite rare, just as ponds are quite rare. Most communities don't have any. But around Massachusetts, if you drive by something that looks like a lake, say to yourself right away, oh, that's a reservoir. Because they always built these near the center of town. So you drive on Holyoke Street in Easthampton and you see that gorgeous Nesquannock Pond. And you say, what a gorgeous pond or lake. It's not at all. It would not be there. It would just be a brook called the Broad Brook, maybe about 15 feet across. The Manhan is the same thing. And all these other brooks around Easthampton do not congregate water. It's only when you have them dammed up, and they were dammed up 5 or 6 times.
And what has been done to all these reservoirs?
Okay, so they've changed over. They're not doing the same job that they did before because electricity has taken over. There might have been a phase go from hydromechanical to hydroelectric. Even that around Easthampton is mostly gone. And thus, what do you do with all these dams, reservoirs, mills, worker homes? Well, you can sell the worker homes off to families. You could change the mill over to places where you can have retail or other activities, social events, so forth. Parks nearby, you can change over. Dams, you might have to leave there. You don't bust down dams. And reservoirs thus are left behind. And usually they're beautiful, but you have to maintain them. So, it's not easy just to leave it behind because what you're leaving behind, sure, it's wonderful to look at, but you got to put money into it to make sure it's safe. And Massachusetts comes around every 2 years to every dam and looks at it, whether it's safe or not. A lot of these dams have a lot of people nearby. A lot of these dams have roads going nearby, most of the time right over them, especially in Easthampton. They go right over these dams. And so, thus, they have to be safe, and most of the time they are. But why do we keep them? We could destroy them. We keep them because they look nice, for one, and it'd be very expensive to get rid of these dams. Plus, you'd have to make new roads. You'd have to build up the land or make a new bridge, and you don't want to do that. So save the dam, which most of the time is a mix of masonry, rock, and earth blended together, which would be the basis of any road anyways. All right, so Easthampton's like a lot of places around Massachusetts. It looks gorgeous, but these bodies of waters are not what you think.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in to our podcast, Canal Days, What Life is Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Comu. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites throughout communities in Massachusetts. The communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and Easthampton, as well as Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. So, today's episode will be discussing the Wilton Brook Pond, located in Easthampton, Massachusetts. So, why was this pond formed?
It was formed in order to put a hydromechanical mill into place here, and thus it became a dam with a reservoir behind it, a power reservoir. And like every one of the reservoirs in Easthampton, it's still around because how do you just knock down a dam, right? But there's a lot still around this location. So around Wilton Brook Pond, there's a lot to see. Some very close in, but some are further out beyond this area. And then what will the future be like for this area? Well, it's happening now. Nature things are being put in, little parks are being put in. So it's a really cool place to go at the dam area of the Wilton Brook. Now, you're not going to even know that it's a dam there. It's an earthen dam. And it's very slightly separated from the Nashawanic by a road. And that's it. And everything, people might think it's part of the Nashawanic, but it's actually not at all. And so, why was it formed? Like all power structures, it was formed to make power for a mill, and it was basically a thread mill that was put in place here. The thread mill's long gone. Some of the worker houses might still be around the area, but mostly you're left with a pleasant-looking reservoir.
And what are some of the features in the immediate vicinity of the pond?
All right, there's a lot around this pond, including the Wilton Brook itself. So this pond, or reservoir, Wilton Brook Reservoir, is made because you dammed up the Wilton Brook, one of many brooks that goes through Easthampton. Now, along the shoreline, there is a nature trail. It's called the Stella Wiersnez Shoreline Trail, and it was put in by the Pascumic Conservation Trust. And it's a very, very nice trail. You can walk around it and come back to the same point, and it's quite nice. But there's a lot of other things put around this area, including right at the edge of the Wilton Dam, there's the John Bator Park, also put in by the Pascumic Conservation Trust. And that's a tiny little park where it has benches, and you can start your nature trail hike along here. Okay, also they have the Christmas Bach Angels Children's Memorial, and this is a place where young people that died at a very young age could be memorialized. And it's done very nicely because they have plaques in the ground around an angel statue, and then off the edge of this plaza, you have more plaques in the ground, all of them honoring many times over young people that died. Not necessarily from Easthampton, but around the general area, and they want to honor all these very young people. And benches that are inside of the park and the trail also has memorial stones. Sometimes those have adults' names inside of it, sometimes they have children's names. So it's a beautiful area with all these really cool memorial features. So it's well worth the time to go here, use a nature trail, watch the scenic views and nature interacting on the pond, and also see these memorial sites.
And really quick before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to sign up for any of his various tours or find out more information, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can also find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for other inquiries or to book a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214 @yahoo.com. And his tours are perfect for fun educational outdoor activities for families and group parties. So, getting back to our interview, what are some of the features beyond the pond?
Just beyond it are some other features very close at hand. You can see them right out there. City Hall has some of its buildings here. Several of the apartments are in the one you see nearby. All right, across the street is Nashawanek Pond, and there's even a boat launch on this Wilton Brook Pond, so you can go with your tiny boat canoe or kayak to the other side of the pond. And lots of roadways. In the distance, you can see the Holyoke Street coming through with a lot of mills down below and lots of traffic, of course, around this area. And there's even a cemetery very close by, and it's quite visible from where you are. It's called the Brookside Cemetery. Right, and of course you got great views of the backside of the Mount Tom Range. Easthampton tends to have a lot of cliff views, and so this area is quite gorgeous to say the least.
And what will the future be like?
Probably more trails will be developing through the years. Hopefully there'll be connections between the different reservoirs on trail systems. Remember, Easthampton has a bike path, and that goes towards around the far side of this Wilton Brook Pond. And imagine having connection between all of the 5 reservoirs of Easthampton and the bike path, and all of them having little parks on the edge of them. That would be a great thing to have at some point. And they're getting very close to having that sort of thing right now. So why doesn't Easthampton push that way? And Easthampton is such a kind of community that they will go in that direction. And I hope the future it will include thus Wilton Brook Pond as much as possible. I hope they don't take it down. It's very safe still. And there's actually a small reservoir just beyond its other tip too. All right, so a lot to do, and the future is bright.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of other podcasts on his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life Was Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites throughout communities in the state of Massachusetts. The communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and Easthampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the Nashawanek Pond in Easthampton, Massachusetts. So, is Nashawanek Pond really a pond?
No, it's a reservoir, and there is no such thing as a pond or lake in Easthampton. It's probably the largest reservoir in Easthampton. No, it's also probably quite old. It goes back to the day of Samuel Williston's mill. And today we're going to talk about what features might be around in Nashawanek and what other parts of the dam. They're actually very visible into the promenade out there. You can walk right there. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Nashawanek Mills area. But this is a reservoir, and it was built by having the area dammed up with an earthen dam, and it would feed into the Williston's thread mills on the northern side of the road there. And it's sometimes called the Upper Mill Pond, which is fine because there's a lower mill pond also made by Samuel Williston. And most people call it now the Nashawanek. It's actually very large. So if you start to walk around it, it goes up to Donatuck Park on one end. And of course, it's on Holyoke Street on the other side. Then it's very residential towards the east. And towards the west, It has two smaller reservoirs. One of it basically touches it. That would be the Wilton Reservoir. And so this is fed by the end by three brooks. One of them quite directly, and that's the Broad Brook. The Broad Brook is so broad that it should really be called a creek. The Broad Creek comes out of Holyoke, comes down the East Mountain, and comes into Easthampton. It doesn't touch the Manhattan until much later, even past the lower mill ponds. And it's a big brook in itself. If this wasn't dammed through here, you would see a big brook going by here that would be feeding into the Manhattan itself, which is also very big. And the Williston Brook also feeds into this area, but that's dammed before it goes into the Neshowannock. And the White Brook also feeds into this area, but that is also dammed before it feeds into the Williston, and which then feeds into the Neshowannock. So it's a lot going on and a lot of water around this area.
And what features are around the Neshowannock?
There's Brookside Cemetery on one side. Towards the east, you get a great view of the Mount Tom Range, of course. Towards the north, you get the mill complex, which has now gone into many different entities, including retail, including little craft shops, artist studios, so forth. And almost all of those mills have been saved. And towards the west, you have the double tiny reservoir of the Wilton and two brooks coming in. You also have a little parks, and you have a viewscape because you have these platforms. You can go up to the edge of Neshowannock from the west. But on Holyoke Street, you also got a promenade, and you can see the spillway area, which of course is lower than the rest of the dam. You have the dam to allow water to spill over. That was not where they got the power for the water power from. They would get that from a tunnel, probably about 150 feet further west along the front of the dam itself. And so there's a lot going on, and a lot has changed through the years. Now, if you had come out here 150 years ago, it would be a very different site, less traffic, a lot more mill activity.
And really quick, before we continue with our interview, to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find podcasts and videos of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for other inquiries or to book a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214 and his tours make for fun educational outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, what are the parts of the dam?
Alright, so you get a good look of the dam here. It's earth, and you can even see on the north side that the mills are lower down than they should be, because you need to have a tunnel coming through, and the water coming through should be pushing into the basement where you had the turbines. But the earthen dam is on underneath where it's now Holyoke Street. There's also a spillway, and then there's a promenade over the body of the reservoir. But under there somewhere is a former tunnel. Used to be a tunnel that fed the water power underneath Holyoke Street or underneath this dam. And that dam is checked every 2 years by the state to make sure that it's still safe. Now, when you back up, brook as wide as this Broad Brook is, there's going to be a lot of water. And so that's why when you look back towards the south, it's a very, very long and wide or broad reservoir that you see. And like all dams, you want to make sure that material is safe. And what they probably did to make it is they probably put compressed stone, crushed stone together with larger blocks of masonry, probably granite, and then probably a lot of earth on top of that.
And tell us a little about the Nashwanik Mills.
Okay, that area is now called the Nashwanik Mills Historic District. It's on a national register as such. It is comprised mostly of the Williston Thread Mill, and then another company that came in later, I think it was called the Glendale, and they built a few more mills more towards the back of that complex. Now, if you go into that area, you'll find businesses such as the Guild Art Supply and a bookmaker, a bookbinder, and also you'll find residential. You'll find a lot of smaller businesses, so many to name. And if you look on one side, you can even see the power congregated in one area. Okay, that's not necessarily where a lot of the power came out of. Most people mistake that. That's more of the backside of the spillway. So keep that in mind. But the mills area, most of the buildings you can go into, and they're little craft shops, artisan buildings, so forth.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of other podcasts on his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new videos and podcasts posted daily. And thank you for tuning in.